Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. In July, Blonid Raleigh was in the studio here describing her horrific experience and her sort of advocacy, I suppose, for victims and survivors of sexual assault and rape. She's a really brave girl who'd had this awful experience and waived her anonymity and spoke out in a very powerful way. Those sort of victims who can find it within themselves to be a voice for others, I'm sure the good they do is extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I think these, the personal stories, I think, are something that impacts people when they hear it. And we always hear this ourselves. One of the good things that journalism can do is, we hear all the time, for example, about sexual assault rates going up, maybe a bit about, domestic violence, these sort of issues. And some of it is reported as, we heard about an epidemic of domestic violence during COVID, for example. But when people stand up and explain how that impacted on them, it moves people in a whole other way. It's very, very difficult for victims, and for all of the hard-hearted journalists that I know, people are really careful with these stories, because you understand that this is an ordinary person, not a public figure, who are putting themselves out there. Inevitably, those stories go on the internet and are subject to the same amount of vitriol as everything else. And, so for somebody to do that is really, really, it is genuinely brave, and that's an overused term. But it is the most powerful way to make these stories come alive. And you see that again and again.
Now, another and totally different story that really gripped people, I think, in July was the story of Gavin Plum, the 37-year-old who planned to kill Holly Willoughby during a home invasion. And he was sentenced to 16 years. Now, he was a former security guard who became obsessed with her. And he had planned basically to tie her up and rape her in front of her family before murdering her and disposing of her body in an abandoned building on the outskirts of London. Quite a detailed plot. But he was one of these sort of loner types.
Yeah, I mean...
that become celebrity obsessed, and many of them aren't dangerous, and many of them are really just, probably socially inept people. But this guy had huge amount of photographs of her, and he was actually caught online, wasn't he, as part of a different operation that police were undercover on internet chat rooms, and they discovered him sort of talking about this.
Yeah, and there was an Irish link there because he had spoken to an Irish man at one stage. I mean, the difference with Plum, I suppose, as well, is that he had a serious conviction for something similar in the past. So that made it clear that it's not just, even though his defence was, this was all just fantasy. One of his lines of his defence was that he couldn't jump over a back wall because he was obese and he wouldn't be able to do what he was.
Which it looked as if he wouldn't have been able to.
He probably does, but the fact that he had this conviction in the past made it, I suppose, more real that this is somebody who's capable of carrying out a criminal act.
Yeah.
But it's a funny aspect of criminality, that these people, this obsession with celebrity, and it's in some ways a hollowness of the soul, is it? That somehow Holly Willoughby's celebrity is going to rub off on them in some way and make them feel, I mean, he was a classic kind of loser, was he? Sitting in his basement, obese and, unloved and unwanted. It was a shocking kind of
lengthy
story.
Sentence anyway. Yeah. I mean, look, there was a lot of stories around the prisons as well in July, and we saw real IRA man Nathan Kinsella moved from Portlaoise over a feud with the Kinahan hitman. We saw The super cartel snitch Rafael Imperiale sentenced to 15 years. And we saw Desi Border Fox O'Hare released from prison following a kidnap sentence. Hasn't been a word from Desi, actually.
No, but no, he hasn't. Now he's getting on as well, isn't he?
He was in Cork, wasn't he? He got out and was
got out.
some sort of a homeless shelter down in Cork he was living in.
Yeah, because of course when you get out of prison, you have to give an address. So it has been known that some people will get put in a homeless hostel because you give that address initially. And, is he going to be there in these months on? I would doubt it. He had a home, of course, in the border area. The Border Fox had a border home. And he seemed to have a very stable relationship. Again, another one of these really unusual characters. It's a sort of probably the most violent of the people who emerged in republicanism during the Troubles. A phenomenal violent history from an early teenage years. He was a sniper in the IRA and managed to fall out with loads of people over the time. Ended up in the INLA and famously was involved in a really horrific kidnapping, which left deep impacts again. However, the other side of him was people always sort of seemed to say he was really quiet and sort of mild and polite in another way.
Liked yoga
and was
religious.
Very religious. So again, contradictory aspects to his character.
Complex character, no doubt about it.
But no doubt about his capacity for violence was unmatched. A small sort of skinny man, but really struck a lot of fear across all of that world.
Of course, in the run-up to the summer, there was a lot of stories around the Kulak Says No, these sort of protests that had been happening outside asylum seeker hostels and premises that were being used from them. But by August, there was quite an interesting story when people purporting to represent Kulak Says No ended up in Belfast alongside some loyalists.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the Kulak Says No was people protesting against a group of asylum seekers who were going to be, the government planned to put a group of asylum seekers in the former Crown Paints factory there. It went on for a very long time, that protest. There was people there, almost 24/7. But it eventually erupted. I don't even think there was, the diggers had moved in and work had begun, and there was an eruption of violence. A huge story at the time, a lot of arrests, people before the court still. But during all that time, there was this really strong internet presence for various people, and some people became kind of well-known social media people around the Kulak Says No. Now, there's these constant splits in that movement, but a group of those people went up to an anti-asylum seeker march in Belfast. I think it had been launched just after the Rotherham situation in the UK, where there'd been violent protests again following an attack on a child. So up there, these guys went. You could see them in the run-up to this. Some of these guys had formed sort of alliances with the Loyalists, because the Loyalism always had this, or aspects of loyalism, I suppose, always had these links with far-right groups in the UK. I mean, Johnny Adair and people like that, they would have been skinheads and would have had links to Combat 18.
Some of the football hooligans.
Yeah, all of that stuff. So, but their kind of thing was, we want to keep people out, and red and, orange and green can work together to stop the others coming in. So they went up and there was the Kulak Says No flag standing beside some, we had one guy in particular, a guy being convicted of a sectarian killing of a Catholic, standing near them anyway. And it caused, it caused outrage, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that we still get the odd email.
It's a bad PR move for them.
Well, it was. And then still get emails about that it was a state plant and Drew Harris had paid them to go up. and various things like that. And people are still, because it really splintered that movement and took some of the heat out of it. Now there'd be other people in that Kulak said those people don't represent us, and that's fair enough. But either way, the flag was there, and they were people who had been at those Kulak protests.
Yeah. Now there was mass overdoses.
Yes.
In Portlaoise prison. These are drugs usually that are coming into the prison system. They're being, sold about the prison system, but there's these street drugs that are, their ingredients are kind of unknown, and they're probably being made in factories somewhere.
Yeah.
We haven't actually identified fentanyl in any of these prison mass overdoses, but they're substances similar to fentanyl. So they're kind of like...
Nitrazine, I think, is one of them.
Nitrazine, yeah. And I think they're super strong chemicals that are put into the street tablets or whatever else, usually taken by drug users who will take anything they can get their hands on. And out in the streets, it's happening quite a lot. But when it happens in the prison system, you have this massive problem. I recall in the Portlaoise one, it was obviously the highest security system to get, I think, 11 of them out of the prison and into hospital, and the kind of the security that took. Now, nobody died.
No. But I mean, it's these. So you can see the face of. What the drugs epidemic that first hit Ireland, of course, was heroin. Back in the 80s, and caused this absolute devastation. But if you look at the level of heroin dealing in this city, it's gone down massively, and it's being slowly replaced by a wave of new chemicals, such as nitrazine, that are and fentanyl, though there's much less of that in Ireland than some of the other substances. But they're basically opioid substances or substitutes. And look, in theory, you could leave this room, log on to the internet, and get some of that stuff delivered. It's being sold on the internet. So, now there may be complications with that. It could be a scam site. But if you looked it up, how can I buy whatever, you'd probably be able to buy it. But either way, it's proven for some criminals easier to get into the country than flying heroin in from Afghanistan effectively. So it's kind of overtaken. But the problem is, of course, that they're not buying some of these are medical drugs. Fentanyl, I think, was initially a medical drug.
Oh, it's still used in healthcare situations as a pain relief. Fentanyl and oxy are all opioids that are used for people usually after surgeries.
Yeah. But they're not, those aren't necessary. They're not buying them off. Doctors aren't giving them packages of things. What they're doing really is a lot of them are being made in China or places like that, and they're not really under any proper conditions. So the strength of what you get is absolutely impossible to know.
Yeah,
and that's causing a lot of the overdoses. There's definitely substances in it. People think, well, I've took one tablet before. I take one now.
Towards the end of the year, I noticed there was fentanyl actually discovered in the north, wasn't there? There is system, because while we have there's obviously fears that fentanyl, and I do think we spoke about it being the next kind of drug that is going to be probably 10 times more dangerous than anything we've seen before. It's proven that it's a matter of time before it's come here. I think that the European market is being eyed up as the next big growth market for fentanyl, street fentanyl. But, it has been in dribs and drabs. There was some overdoses, I think, at one point about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 2016. And, the actual fentanyl, I think, was discovered in the labs in the north.
Oh, no, it's been discovered in prisons and in Ireland. There have been seizures, absolutely, and overdoses. But it's a range of substances, the nitrazine is just as strong and dangerous, and various other ones. So it's a unique challenge, I think, in all ways, because I think a lot of the smuggling of it is done on a kind of a small scale over the internet, and that's very hard to trace. I mean, so there's been a lot of overdoses in Dublin. Many of them luckily people have survived, but it's going on all the time. And there's been warnings put out by the Irish Prison Service, but also by workers in Dublin, telling people that are drug users, like chronic drug users, giving them details about who to phone and how to deal with it if there is an overdose. And those drugs really have replaced heroin in many parts of the city.
By September, we started our first Q&A, which is our questions and answers. And the big question that came in on that first one, I think that sort of shows that idea of people who listen to podcasts like to be able to interact, don't they?
Yeah.
They like to be able to sort of interact with the hosts, we've been told, of course. They like to ask questions. They like to hear their questions being read out. They like to hear their comments being read out. And, of course, the Regency conspiracy theories.
Yeah. The Regency conspiracy
the Jonathan
theory.
Dowdall questions. Yeah. Yes, he does remain fascinating apart from his liking for fish. But that was a start, and that really proved to be a successful, and we've tried to continue it if we could ever remember the email address. And we're going to certainly go into the new year doing the Q&As more frequently. But what else happened?
Well, if you look at the top 10 stories there, one of them is about Jamie Iceman Stevenson, a Scottish gangster, Bomber Kavanagh and Liam Byrne. We have
pleading guilty at the last minute
we have the ghost hack in Australia.
Yeah.
And we have then, four of them, I think, there are around encrypted devices. So again...
Oh, sorry. And you mean that because, of course, Liam Byrne and Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, while we talk about the NCA, the National Crime Agency, targeting them, it was actually the French and Dutch who caught them on Encrochat and were able to send it to their English colleagues to prove that Bomber Kavanagh, while behind bars in Dovegate prison, was plotting to dump and bury guns and hand them over to the cops in order to get himself a lesser sentence.
And also we have Iceman Stevenson again, caught on Encrochat.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
We have the Kinahan lieutenant who sold Encrochat phones to French gangs. And we have obviously the ghost hack, which was a more recent hack that occurred in Australia, where it was a separate encrypted network, much, much smaller, 100% criminals, it was ultimately said. And Australia was the biggest user of it, but the second biggest user was gangs in Ireland. And
particularly, I think, the family organisation, one of them that were targeted. There was 4 big gangs in Ireland that were using the ghost network. It was kind of strange that the Australians and Irish criminals were using the same network. There was obviously somebody that was, had some link somewhere. I mean, they are very far apart territories to be using one communication network. And there was very little in between. I think there was one individual in Italy that was using it, who I always reckon must have been the in-between or the seller or whatever. Anyway, it will all emerge as going forward. But question for you then, right? Yeah. Are you sorry? You're in trouble now.
No, I do. I saw a smirk had emerged on your face there, so go on.
Are you sorry that you suggested that I bang on about Encrochat?
Well, I'm not sorry.
You are a little...
No. Well, I suppose you might have had a point, because you see these encrypted networks have absolutely wiped out a generation of criminals in the UK, a high-level generation of criminals. But again, it's not, as you like to bang on.
Yeah,
we haven't seen those prosecutions in Ireland. I mean, you're talking about a couple of...
We didn't prosecute here. We
No.
decided that we'd use the information we got as intelligence, and it was locked away for a long time.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that, some of that intelligence is being used in going forward in other investigations now, but it was a little bit too late. It was a bad decision, and nobody is willing to admit that it was a bad decision to do that. When you look at the UK, when you look at the all the challenges to the courts across Europe, it's hard to see why we didn't even try. And in many cases, what you're seeing in the UK, because that's where most of the activity was, because they moved on the intelligence that they were getting, they actually caught a lot of criminals red-handed.
Yeah.
So they never even had to fight the cases, the state. They pleaded guilty, they rolled over on them because they were essentially caught red-handed.
Yeah, I mean, we do, look, there's different legal systems across Europe, and, you can see why you might get legal advice that there could be breaches of privacy, that there could be laws that, so, are the warrants specific enough? All of that, and may have led to a conservative approach. But we definitely took a conservative approach. In the UK, those challenges have gone in, and the UK legal system and the Irish legal system are really very, very similar. Though there clearly are different laws in the books, and all of those legal challenges, and they've gone at a very high level. People have brought them against the Encrochat hack. A lot of it focusing on the fact that how these messages were intercepted. All of them have failed. So
there was two prongs really to Encrochat.
Yeah.
And the first was when it sort of emerged that they had been hacking these phones, because of course the company realised that the phones were under surveillance essentially, and they sent out a message to all the phone users. Now there was 60,000 phone users across Europe, Encrochat phones, to get rid of your handset. We've been compromised, and phones went into rivers and were thrown out, and SIM cards were eaten, and whatever else happened. But when that emerged, together the forces in Europe moved, en masse and made arrests. They raided properties in the Netherlands that we've spoken about. They found a really sinister torture chamber, which was housed in a specially adapted container deep in a forest. There was, the figures are there for anyone to see. There was cash, there was weapons, there was drugs, there was arrests, there was a big, huge movement of police all together on the same day. So we didn't do that.
No.
And then we didn't follow it up with the other court cases.
Yeah.
Even though Ireland was named in the Europol Encrochat press conferences as one of the countries that was privileged enough to get the information, to be sent it since, over a course of 4 months really, we never even made a statement on it.
No, because look, we have had a conservative approach to lots of things in Ireland in terms of policing. And they're certainly during the Troubles that we spoke about earlier, there was a culture of collecting information on subversive organizations, and that collecting of that information was because these subversives were directly targeting the state. It probably was this culture of where having the information was the most important thing, rather than seeking prosecutions to know what was going on. So maybe that's an outworking of that culture. And we saw some of that culture, I suppose, during the Regency trial where, certain branches of the Gardaí didn't seem to know what the intelligence, the crime and security branch were doing or were aware of. And look, sure, they've suffered for it now because they've had to listen to you bang on about it.
You bang on too, obviously. Because,
no, I don't. You're
the one who pointed out that all those top episodes were around Encrochat. So look, we'll just admit that we bang on. Yeah. So by October, obviously, there's a lot of activity around the UAE and the Kinahan cartel because Helen McEntee, the Justice Minister, signed that treaty, that extradition treaty. That was a big moment when we made an agreement with the UAE that meant what people wanted in this country could be extradited, right? The Garda Commissioner around the same time, or maybe shortly before that, Drew Harris, urged the Kinahan mob to rat on their bosses. And there was a lot of kind of talk and political sort of motions that we were getting nearer to the Kinahan, to the top command, to Daniel Kinahan ultimately. So there was a lot of that. And of course, Sean McGovern was arrested in Dubai, which was a big moment. And it was all looking very positive for sort of the forces of law here, coupled with their political colleagues in government. And then in rattles Jerry Hutch with an announcement, at least in the 20th of October, that's the date of the top listen to Crime World episode. Jerry the Monk Hutch set to run in general election. October 24th, Jerry the Monk Hutch arrested in Spain.
So that's the 20th of October, that episode we put out, Jerry the Monk Hutch to run in the general election, right? Now, if you look back, not even many months before, to the Jonathan Dowdall house, like the idea that Jerry Hutch was going to run in that election would have been so bizarre. And
But I mean, the story itself, because of course, that was the first time that there had been any kind of indication of it. And the story wasn't a direct statement from Jerry Hutch that had broken on the 20th of October. Myself and Ali Bracken of the Sunday Indo had run the stories. It was a kind of a suggestion that sources close to him were saying that. But we were pretty sure of ourselves that this wasn't just, a sort of a, what would you call it, a throwaway remark, that this was a well-considered route that Jerry the Monk Hutch was supposed to be taking. And I think at that time, there was a sense that he wanted to kind of, try and work out the temperature, work out how it would go down. And
well,
of course,
fly when they do the budget leaks, they fly a kite is what they say.
Well, he flew to Lanzarote after that leak came out. But of course, then, as we said, 4 days later, he's arrested in Spain, which was an equally extraordinary story. Yeah. And he was arrested on this sort of money laundering investigation. But as that, story unfolded, the authorities in Lanzarote, in the judiciary, announced that there was sort of investigations into people trafficking. It became a bit strange. And then he was brought before the courts and put into custody in relation to money laundering.
Yeah. So if you look at the start of October, right, which is only 3 months ago,
is it?
Right, or whatever, is it even 3 months? Yeah. 2 months ago, would you have said, this is the start now? That episode ran on the 20th.
Yeah.
Which is more likely? Jerry Hutch will nearly get elected to the Dáil, or Sean McGovern back in an Irish jail. You would have said.
I would have said Sean McGovern.
You would, and like everybody else would have.
Yeah.
So that shows you how unpredictable all of that was. I mean, the Sean McGovern thing, there was political coordination went on in advance of it. Drew Harris had been over there. Helen McEntee, there was agreements signed. There was sort of statements from both the Dubai officials and the Irish officials. The arrest of Sean McGovern came about, and it all looked imminent.
Yeah, especially because they seem to have this 40-day thing in the UAE that they can hold them in custody for 40 days before they're extradited. And it was like you were kind of, ooh, it's going to be before Christmas.
So it looked like it, but it may still may well happen, of course, and we still believe it should happen and could happen, but it just shows you the when you're dealing with in Dubai, as we said before, it's not a democracy. It's not even half a democracy. Yeah. It's not even anything equivalent to a democracy. It's run by a family, and whatever they said is law. Whatever they say is law. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, we'll move on from Jerry because no doubt.
Well, we moved to November when obviously all of a sudden Jerry the Monk Hutch has got himself out of custody on the basis that he wants to come home to run for general election. He comes in through Dublin Airport and confirms that he's running for general election. He's then seen down putting in his ballot papers. And the next time he's seen is sitting here in between us in the Crime World studio, where he conducts an interview with us in which he is discussing firsthand his experience of the aspects of the Kinahan Hutch feud, where he's talking about his arrest in Spain, his return to Ireland, the Regency Hotel trial, his feelings around Jonathan Dowdall, his childhood, his sort of beginnings in crime, organised crime and beyond, and finally his political ambitions and his policies, which became a bit shallow at that point in what he was, I think anybody that watched the interview and what I think they could have come away with, and I was interested to hear some commentary around it, was he spoke very openly and very freely, but when it came to politics, he didn't exactly coat himself in glory for the political classes who want policies and who want sort of very, very detailed thinking on what they're going to do. Didn't do him any harm. No. He didn't have any political policies or proper direction. Well,
look, I mean, it was a sort of it was a fascinating experience anyway. I think what you see is, if you look back on it all now, what you see is there's a protest vote out there.
Yeah.
Now, we all know there's a protest vote, but I suppose what shocked maybe the political parties, certainly shocked the Taoiseach and Pascal Donoghue and all these other people who've commented on it, they've had an explanation for it, and that's that Jerry Hutch got a lot of publicity. That's why he got all those votes. I mean, I don't think even in their heart of hearts they can believe that. Now they may well do, but it's hard to believe that they don't understand that there's a protest vote, and that doesn't go to the usual suspects.
Could we have one powerful podcast if we could get people elected?
But it would, because they'd have them. You wouldn't. Yeah, look, you banged on about your Encrypted and it hasn't changed any policy.
Nothing happened in the world. Yeah,
no, but what I mean is, it's more. There is, I think, there is a protest vote that wants to see the system smash that. Not that they want to elect some representative who is critical of the system. They want to vote against the whole thing. And they believe, and I don't agree with this, but they believe that the people in the Dáil, the TDs, are more immoral than the man they voted for, Jerry Hutch.
And it was such an insight into that divisiveness that's out there in society, because there was very few people with middle ground on it all.
There was, and that's I suppose the nature of doing something controversial.
Good or bad, it's black or white.
Yeah, but I mean, look, the interview went out there, and there was very little reaction. In one way, I mean, obviously, loads of people watched it, loads of reaction from the public, but no reaction from, say, RTE or whatever, for a week. So it was only when he nearly got elected that reaction occurred. I mean, no politician bothered to comment on it before. So it's not really, that shows you that it's once Jerry Hutch nearly entered that world, that became unacceptable.
Yeah, and where blame had to be
apportioned, and it's not
found that caused it, because
which is not it's not our fault. It's somebody else. But look, then again,
November was also dominated, it has to be said, by the Conor McGregor trial. And as we started to cover it, we realised just how much interest there was in it. It was the content of the trial. It was the window into the world that we got, that he lived in. It is his fame and celebrity, obviously. And
I think it was even deeper than that. I think it was our female listeners were the ones that really, really honed in on it, because, of course, it's all those other things, Conor McGregor being one of the most famous people in the world and all of that. But there was that, it was Nikita Hand standing up, telling a complicated story.
A sort of warts and all story, wasn't it?
Story.
It was
a
that
complicated story, but a complicated story that I have to say, from the women I talked to, loads of them said, they related to their own.
They could connect with it in some way. In some way, not saying everybody's had that experience, but they could connect with it. They could connect with a lot of aspects of it.
Yeah.
They could connect with the idea of that, consent, and the whole idea of somebody
ending up in a non-ideal situation, but then still knowing that they're not. It's not right that they're fair game, because they've had, women saying to me, I remember, when I was, 10 years ago, I had all these points and I ended up in this situation, and knowing that what was happening to them was wrong. So it really, really struck that chord, I think. And of course, Conor McGregor's power, celebrity, wealth, all of that, for a young woman to stand up in the face of that, in the face of the social media stuff, in the face of some of the most famous or infamous people in the world, Andrew Tate and these people all offering their opinion. Like, again, it takes an absolute courage, and I think that's that also struck a chord with people.
And it's something that she will have to take some time to reflect on.
Yeah.
To fully understand what she's been through, what she faces into in the future, because her anonymity is gone now.
For life, in a sense. But, you have to say, for all of the negative comments, and they do exist, there is a huge amount of support and respect for her, and a huge amount of, I think, gratitude for somebody to take that difficult case. It's different when there's when there is that complex case, to stand up and take that and say, well, it doesn't matter. what I drank or whatever. That doesn't matter. I still have entitlement to say no. And for that to be proven and backed by a court, I think has been a very powerful moment for some people.
Now, by December, as we wrap up the year, of course, that civil trial and the fallout from it continues, because there was the Cuss battle, and Conor McGregor had put some opinions out on social media, and the interest in the story continued. And obviously, the Cuss went against McGregor. And other things went against McGregor, because all the while it seems to have sort of wound down a bit now, has it? That the certain companies were taking his drink brands associated with him off off their shelves. That people were businesses were coming out to.
So I mean, if you look at what's
to punish him, I suppose, for what was decided in court against him.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a degree of cancelling, I suppose, if you want to put it that way. And that comes at Conor McGregor from his business interests, which some some of the shops in Ireland no longer will stock his alcohol products. And that's certainly going to cause him damage. There's other people that are not going to work with him, and that's going to cause him some damage. There's also the fact that he was brought before the courts. His text messages about the case, where he described the court as a kangaroo court, that is also, the judge said he may consider bringing contempt of court proceedings. So all of that happens to Conor McGregor. It obviously has a deep impact on him. According to his own spokesman, he's very upset, etc., etc. The other part of it is he so famous and wealthy that he can't effectively be cancelled? He can be removed from certain areas, but he can't be cancelled, I don't think. I think he can be damaged and affected, but he's still putting social posts.
So much division around it as well, isn't there?
There's so much division.
There's nobody that seems to have this neutral stance to it.
No, I mean, look,
he has so much support despite what we heard in court. Even in his denials, what was heard in court, I think really women found that pretty hard to listen to. I'm talking about what he admitted to doing, because of course he denied rape. And it was civil proceedings, not criminal proceedings. But he did agree and admit that he had this night out as his partner, Dee Devlin, was at home pregnant with his child, that he had sort of picked up women, shared cocaine, hoped to maybe bring them home to the hotel, but they fecked off on him. So he then picked up his phone and got in touch with Nikita Hand and her friend, as Nikita Hand had been communicating with him on social media, and he brought them back to the hotel room. He admitted in the courtroom that he had, I think he called it athletic sex, on a number of occasions with Nikita Hand without using a condom. All those things I think women find a bit offensive. I don't know, most men I know find that pretty difficult as well. But there's this huge big cohort of largely young men who support it and who don't have any moral issue with it whatsoever, because that's where you get into that territory of Andrew Tate and all that goes on with their sort of line of thinking and what they project and what they push out into the world, that men should be allowed to behave like that and there's nothing wrong with it.
But we live in a divisive world, don't we?
We do.
I mean, if you look back at some of the stories we've covered there, Christy Kinahan and Putin, and then loyalists and Kulak and Conor McGregor, the Monk interview, we live in a world where there's divisions, and those divisions are seen in maybe the election of Donald Trump. So we live in a divided world, and some of that social media plays an impact. You talk about, the huge amount of support, and there is, of course, on social media. If you did a Red Sea poll and asked Irish people, there probably isn't a massive amount of support for Conor McGregor, but there is a significant minority, and they can make a lot of noise. So we see even in our humble crime stories, those divisions in society play out and play all the way through it. That's the way it is, isn't it? It's a funny thing that even a story about Christy Kinahan can have some of those big political issues shot through with it. I mean, Christy Kinahan was a really he was actually spoke about Andrew Tate, saying he admired some aspects of him, and Russell Brand. So there is what there is there's, and people will listen to this and say, well, you're part of the establishment, there's your establishment views. Obviously, people like Simon Harris would say you're not.
Yeah,
you're not representing.
You certainly wouldn't.
So look, and who knows? But it's So we live. But so that's, I think, partly why crime is interesting. Crime stories are interesting is because we look at all the ones we talked about there, and the global reach and the impact beyond even a load of drugs being found in Kerry. How that stretches out and fits into the bigger world and is an example of it. And I think the Conor McGregor reaction is also an example of it. But look, we can say it's a divisive world, but I think in the case of Kinahan, the greatest test you can give a divisive claim is to put it before a jury of your peers in a court managed by a judge. That claim was put in a court. It's not, you can have an opinion, I can have an opinion, and anybody else can. But it's actually put to the test. And it was found in our favour. It's as simple as that. So you can say whatever you want, and you can have divisive opinions on Jerry Hutch's interview. But in Kinahan's case, you have to accept that there is a greater standard. She has reached a greater standard by going through that process.
For sure. Now, moving onwards to look towards 2025, we are definitely going to have I'm closing my iPad.
Yeah.
And that's it. Turning off the lights. But we are going to have a very exciting year next year. There's big developments planned for Crime World, and we're hopefully going to continue with its success. And the interest, it seems to, people are interested in the sort of stuff we have to talk about. And we're certainly going to do a lot more of those Q&As. And actually, if one of us could remember the email address.
Well, is it not crimeworld@sundayworld.com? But it's definitely crimeworldpod@gmail.com.
It's my New Year's resolution to have it written on the walls in here, and a little light on it. But anyway, he's right. So just send your questions in to that, and we will dust ourselves down and come back and have a little look at them.
And bang on again throughout 2025.
We'll bang on for another year if we're still here to bang on.
Right.
So over and out.
Thanks very much, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.